Is your flock starting to look a little scruffy? Have you noticed that there's feathers all over your chicken run? Have the eggs just slowly dried up and you're not getting as many as you used to? Well, it's probably just molting season. It's not something you have to worry about at all. Today we're going to talk about what molting season is, why it happens, and some ways that you can help your chickens through this difficult time. We'll also go over some of the most commonly asked questions regarding molting and cover some of the myths that maybe add confusion to the process. And finally, I will give you a checklist of tools and tips that you can use to help your chickens get through this rather embarrassing time of their life, but it's really not that big of a deal. So first up, what is molt? It kind of sounds gross, but it's really a natural process that occurs in a lot of different animals, whether it's shedding of skin, fur, or in this case, when we're talking about chickens, it's the shedding of feathers. When chickens molt, they're going through the process of losing most, if not all, of their broken, tattered, and worn out feathers in order to make room in their body for new feathers to keep them warm through the upcoming winter. Now, this process can look entirely different depending on your chicken's breed, the age of your birds, where you're located, and what the weather's like in your area. There are a couple signs that your chickens have started the molting process, the first being the loss of feathers. It's pretty common to see feathers all around your yard, especially in these nesting boxes like this. They'll actually pull off some of their under feathers to create nests. That's totally normal. But when you see the birds starting to look really bald and really patchy, and there's more feathers consistently in your nesting boxes, that's a really good sign that the molt has started. The second sign that molt has started for your chickens is a reduction in egg production. That's because chickens don't have as much energy to put into eggs as they do growing feathers. So you'll notice a lot less eggs being laid. Some hens will stop laying completely. Others will just be more sporadic. They won't lay quite as many. But don't get this confused with light. Remember that chickens typically need 14 to 16 hours of adequate light per day in order to properly lay an egg. Here in Nebraska in September, we get below 14 hours of sunlight, so you don't want to get that confused. It's very possible that your birds are laying less if you are not supplementing light in your coop because of the sunlight requirement and not molt. So fewer eggs in your nesting box may be a sign or symptom of molt, but it's not a guarantee that the molt has started. It could just be that there's not enough light. The third sign of molt is lethargic birds. It's totally normal for birds to be chilling out like this during the heat of the day or taking dust baths, but if they're being really lethargic, especially when there's food or other activity around, it's a good sign they just don't have the energy to be as active as they normally are. As you can see from all the decorations behind me, it's fall here, which is generally when the molt occurs, either late summer or early fall. That's because, again, they're trying to get new feathers so that they can survive the cold, cold winter. Now, there are some exceptions to this. If a chicken is undernourished, it's stressed out, or there's a lot of disruptions to its daily life, they could go through a premature molt or like a partial molt, but generally it's going to take place in the fall. Another factor to consider when molt is going to happen is the age of your bird. First-year chickens generally do not go through an adult full molt. Instead, they go through what's called a juvenile molt. This happens several times during the first 6 months of their life. Shh, I'm trying to do it. I'm in the middle of a video. Can you be quiet for 2 seconds? I just got to finish the video. Thank you. This happens several times during the first 6 months of their life, where they shed all of their down feathers and replace them with adult ones. So if your chicks were hatched in the spring, they probably aren't going to go through a molt that first year. Instead, it'll happen next fall. If your chicks are hatched in the late fall or early winter, their molt might actually end up in the spring. Finally, depending on the individual bird, the molting process can take generally between 8 and 16 weeks. But when this process starts, it's not like they lose all of their feathers at once and then it takes 8 to 16 weeks in order for them to regrow. First off, they would look silly and ridiculous. Second of all, most likely they would all die. Instead, it's a slow progression that takes place over several months, beginning at the top of their head and moving into the feathers that they lose along their neck, which can be a little confusing. That's because a breeding female that has been mated with by a rooster will sometimes lose all of their neck feathers because a rooster actually holds on to their neck feathers when they're mating, which means a female could lose all of her neck feathers and not be going through molt. She's just gotten mated with a lot. But a bird that's truly gone through molt will then lose feathers down her back and into the wings, and finally they'll lose their tail feathers last. So we've talked about what molting is. Now let's dive deeper into why molt actually happens. I've already mentioned that they're replacing their old feathers with new ones, but the reason that's really important is because these feathers are what insulate a chicken's body and keep them warm. Chickens don't have the ability to sweat because they don't have sweat glands, and they also don't have blood flow to their extremities like their feet, their wattles, or their beaks. So feathers are really important to maintaining their body temperature. There's There's a lot of other things they do like dust baths and panting to regulate their temperature, but these feathers are critical. Chickens do a great job cleaning their feathers, spending a lot of time moving them where they need to be and preening them constantly. But eventually time just runs its course and they get broken down. Feathers also keep water and moisture away from a chicken's skin, which is really critical during the winter months so they don't freeze. They also protect against cold, windy days. Now that we know the what and the why, let's talk about how you can help your chickens through this process. The single most important thing that you can do for your birds to get through this time is to make sure that they have all of their nutritional needs covered. They're already spending a ton of energy and they're stressed out growing feathers. The last thing you want them doing is trying to spend more time and energy scrounging around for food. That's why I really like this Purina Laina feed, because it's a complete feed that has everything your birds need, not just to survive, but to thrive. With Purina, you're gonna get optimum nutrition for healthy birds and nutritious eggs. Even though they're not laying as much, this Oyster Strong system does help kick in so that they don't have to make up all the calcium in their system when they do start laying eggs. There's 5 times as much omega-3s per eggs, prebiotics and probiotics, which is going to support digestive and immune health, and there's no added antibiotics or hormones. With this feed, you're also going to get the marigold extract, which helps with vibrant colored egg yolks, and it is rich in antioxidants, so you're supporting your chicken's immune health. But what really sets this feed apart is the targeted amino acids and essential minerals, which do help grow beautiful, strong feathers. While I open this bag with one hand, expertly, might I say, on the first try, not going to brag, let's talk about those amino acids, because they are crucial for chickens during the molting process, because they're the building blocks of proteins, which are essential for the formation of new feathers. Feathers are primarily made from keratin, a protein which requires very specific amino acids, and is one of the reasons I love this Purina feed, because it's backed by science. There's 2 primary amino acids right here. I cannot pronounce them. I have tried multiple times. I give up. I'm done embarrassing myself. I'm just putting them in text right here. These amino acids are essential in producing the keratin. What Purina has done is spent countless hours of time and research making sure that these amino acids are not only in your feed, but they're in your feed in ways in which your chickens can actually digest. Now, if your birds are looking really, really rough, I'm talking me on 3 hours of sleep, a Monday morning with bedhead that looks like this, right? They're bald, it's getting cold, and they don't have a lot of feathers. There is another option, which is the Purina high protein feed. This comes in layer pellet form, so it's easy to digest. There's not a lot of waste. It's made with black soldier fly larvae and other protein sources. The high protein just gives your birds that little extra oomph they need to get through the molt. Just like the omega-3, you're going to get no added antibiotics and the Oyster Strong system, but you do get that extra protein, the 3% compared to the layer feed. That's from that black soldier fly larva, and that is all included right in the pellet. Again, just giving these chickens a little extra boost in energy to make it through the molt comfortably. Once you have your food taken care of and you're making sure it's always readily available, the next thing you want to make sure that's always available is, of course, fresh, clean water. This can make or break a chicken's health. Now that the hot summer sweltering days are over, you may be tempted to think that water isn't maybe as important, but actually the opposite is true. As they get into molt, chickens really rely on hydration in order to grow strong feathers. Something to think about if you live in a northern state where it gets really cold is what to do when your water freezes. Whether that's looking into heated watering systems, bringing water inside. I don't necessarily recommend it in the coop because you don't want water in the coop to freeze. But if you can find a way to make sure that there's constant water supply, that's going to help your chickens through molt. All right, so thinking of this in human terms, first we got food, then we got water. The last thing that we need to take care of is shelter. First thing you need to pay attention to on your coop is the airflow. Now, airflow is going to be good for your birds. You don't want gases and the ammonia to build up from chicken droppings inside your coop. So there needs to be a way for it to get out. Proper ventilation is key, but you want that above roost level. So something in the roof is ideal. Anywhere that the air is going to flow over the chickens and not on them, because they don't have those protective feathers and they are trying to stay warm. You don't want any cold drafts getting in your coop whatsoever. So any gaps, any holes in the coop at chicken level, you want to seal up. Spend a good amount of time looking over your windows and your doors, any type of seam, just to make sure that no cold, windy drafts are able to get in. Cold drafts can lead to all kinds of problems for your birds. The first is that it leads to stress, and that stress leads to health problems. Chickens can actually get colds just like us humans. They get sick. They can have hypothermia even, or frostbite where they freeze their feet and freeze their heads, their combs and wattles. Just not good. The other thing is they spend energy trying to stay warm, and that energy should be spent on growing feathers and recovering from molt. So you just want to make sure that there's no cold drafts. That being said, a good insulated coop that is all sealed up is going to produce a lot of humidity. All those chicken bodies in here breathing, all the gases that are being released, and you combine all that moisture in the air with frozen temperatures and you will get frostbite. So you want to make sure that there's ventilation at least somewhere for all of that moisture to escape. Finally, to give your chickens a nice warm place to get away from the cold when they don't have any feathers, you want to give them plenty of extra bedding in the coop. You know how much I love my hemp bedding for its insulative properties and the fact that it can soak up moisture. Straw works really well too. Just make sure you provide them with lots of clean bedding. Those are all things that you can do to help your chickens through the molting process, but there's also a few things you can do that are not so helpful. You've probably noticed by now that in a video all about chickens, I've uncharacteristically only ever held one chicken. That's because during this time of their life, they're rather delicate creatures. So holding or handling your chickens is just going to add extra stress to their life that they don't need. Unfortunately, that means you're going to have to hold off on cuddling your chickens just for a few weeks. Really, you want to avoid any stressful situations whatsoever. Moving them to a new environment, or one of the biggest stressors, especially this time of year, is adding new birds to your flock. If you can help it, just wait until next spring, because any change in their environment, especially if it comes to breeding, is going to make a big difference on their stress levels. All right, so we have talked about what molting is, why it happens, and how you can help your chickens get through it. But before I give you my final checklist, we're going to go over some of the common misconceptions and myths around molting. Misconception number one is that chickens feel a lot of pain when they're going through the molt process, and thankfully that's not true. They don't really feel anything when they lose their feathers, similar to us when we lose our hair. When their new feathers come in, called pin feathers, there is actually a blood flow supply to those, and so it can be a little sensitive, and that's why we don't want to hold them during the molting process. Myth number two, there's a whole slew of remedies on the internet on how you can speed up the molting process and help your chickens grow feathers faster. But in reality, there's no safe, proven, and effective method on how you can outsmart nature and get your chickens to grow faster feathers. Instead, focus on giving a high quality feed like that which we feed from Purina. Make sure they have all their needs taken care of and give them a stress-free environment. The rest will take care of itself. Myth number three, only sick chickens lose their feathers. Even the healthiest of birds is eventually going to get their feathers broken and tattered. So it's actually a sign of healthy birds that they're going through molt. And myth number four is that you need to provide supplemental heating for your flock in order for them to stay warm during the molt. Even though your chickens may be a little more exposed than normal, as long as your coop is sealed up nice and tight and there's no cold, windy drafts getting in, chickens actually are very resilient and they can regulate their temperature even if they don't have all their feathers. It's actually better to let your chickens acclimate to the natural weather outside than to give them a bunch of supplemental heat, because it's possible that they will end up overheating. That was a lot of information we just packed into 12 minutes and flew through rather quickly. So I want to recap and give you a checklist of things that you can do to make sure this is your chicken's best molting season yet. To recap, molt is a natural process where chickens lose their feathers and it's completely normal. You don't have to stress about it. It can take place in juveniles or adults, but mostly adults, and it's usually going to happen in the fall. And when it does happen, it's going to take anywhere from 8 to 16 weeks. You're probably going to notice a decline in egg production, but again, that's totally normal. It might even stop completely. To make sure you're caring for your flock, here's the checklist. Checklist item number one, don't stress out your chickens at all. Don't hold your birds if you don't have to. Don't add new birds to the flock, and whatever you can possibly do to make their environment as comfortable as possible, do that. Checklist item number two, make sure they have plenty of fresh water that's always available, and if you're in a cold environment, make sure it doesn't freeze. Checklist item number three, feed greatness to your flock with Purina's high protein feed or their omega-3 layer ration. All the vitamins and minerals, amino acids, and proteins you need for your chickens to regrow their feathers is found in this feed. If there's one thing you take from this video, it's that proper nutrition is key. Checklist item number four, inspect your coop to make sure there's no cold, windy drafts that can get in, because remember, a cold draft is a deadly draft. Checklist number five, make sure you have clean, dry bedding in your coop that's really insulative. If you follow all these steps, your flock is going to get back to looking like their fabulous feathery selves in no time. Well, that's Molting 101. I hope you guys enjoyed and you learned something. If you have any comments or questions regarding molting or anything chicken related, I'm by no means an expert, but I'm happy to share my thoughts. Thank you to Purina for sponsoring this video. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next one.